This is Dr. Barbara Berkeley, and today what I'm going to attempt to do for you is to recreate the talk that I give all of my new patients the first day that they come into my practice. It's a talk about what I believe causes weight gain, and I think it's helpful. And if you are one of my patients, you can hear the talk again now. If you're not, you can hear it for the first time. As I say, whenever I give advice or my opinion about weight management, this is only my opinion. It's my opinion on the date that I made this video, and it can always change based on science, but these opinions have been pretty much the same for about 20 years now. So here we go. Essentially, I don't believe that weight is caused by an excess of calories. I know that's heresy, but I don't believe it to be true. It's not what I observe to be true, and I'm going to explain to you why. What I believe is that you have gained weight because of one thing, and that is the amount of insulin that your body's making. As it turns out, insulin is a hormone made by a small organ that sits behind your stomach called the pancreas. It's a little organ that's kind of shaped like that. And the pancreas has a number of cells in them called beta cells that produce insulin. And insulin turns out to be the only hormone that you have that can store fat in your fat cells. So we're going to be talking about the hormone insulin. There's an I for insulin. If you have a pancreas that's wiped out by autoimmune disease, for example, this happens to children with type 1 diabetes, they don't make any insulin and they wind up going to the doctor because they're wasting away, because if you can't make insulin, again, you cannot store fat. Now, it turns out that the opposite is also true. If you produce too much insulin, you store too much fat. So what I'm going to ask you to do for the rest of your lives is, rather than think about how many calories you're eating, I'd like you to start focusing on how much insulin is your body producing when you eat food. So in order to know that, we have to talk about what makes insulin stimulation when you eat. Now, the thing that makes the body produce insulin is the consumption of foods that turn into sugar after they're eaten, because insulin has a second job, which is to control the level of sugar in the blood. So if you eat anything that turns into sugar after digestion, it will be absorbed into your bloodstream as sugar. And what would those things be? Well, obviously, if you eat sugar itself or anything that looks like sugar, so that would be honey or syrup or molasses, anything like that, that's going to put sugar in your blood. But the source of blood sugar in most of Americans is actually not largely from sugar. It's from a larger compound that turns into sugar after digestion, and that is the starchy carbohydrates. These are actually kind of like big buildings that are built out of Lego blocks of sugar, and after you eat them, the digestive system breaks the building down into its individual sugar Lego blocks and puts that into your bloodstream. So what foods would those be? Well, here's where I depart from a lot of people in my beliefs, and that is that one of the major sources of those sugars is grain, and that includes whole grain. Yes, whole grain has a little bit of fiber around the outside and some extra vitamins, but essentially it is just a seed full of sugar, whether it's whole or processed. So grain and the things that come from grain, meaning cereal, also things made from flour, which of course is all the baked goods that we like, and pasta. And then another source of carbohydrate in the American diet is corn, which actually is also a grain. And let's just go over some of what the grains are. Besides wheat, you also have grains like oats and barley and rye and so on. And rice, I might add. And then the other major source of starchy carbohydrate in the American diet is the one very starchy vegetable, which is potatoes. So all of these foods, after we eat them, are broken down into sugar, and they enter the bloodstream here as these individual sugar molecules. So when the blood sugar in your blood goes up, that's a dangerous situation for your blood vessels. And so your body has a mechanism to get rid of this sugar, and that is that the body releases insulin from the pancreas, and insulin's job is to move sugar out of the bloodstream. Now, how can it do that? Well, first of all, it can take some of the sugar and put it into your fat cells by transforming that sugar into fat. Because remember, I told you that insulin is a fat storage hormone, so it can take this sugar and move it into your fat cells. But it also has a second choice, which is it can take the sugar and move it into your muscle cells, where the muscles have little furnaces in them called mitochondria that can actually burn that sugar, and it kind of goes up the chimney and it's gone, and that's really great. Now, here's where I believe that the calorie theory breaks down. Until about 10 or 15 years ago, as I'm fond of telling my patients, I could eat more probably than any of them ever could. I could eat a tremendous amount of food. I could eat a whole loaf of bread at a sitting. I could eat a cheesecake at a time, and yet I never gained weight. And parenthetically, I think it's important to say that nobody ever said that I was gluttonous or that I was out of control or that I had an eating problem, because as long as I didn't gain weight, nobody saw that as being a problem. And I think that's important to remember, that it's the fact that you're gaining weight that causes people and yourself to comment on your having an eating issue. So what was going on with me when I was eating these zillions of calories and not gaining? Well, the answer is that this system, which is sort of a partitioning system, was working very well. I would eat a meal that contained a tremendous amount of sugar and starch. I would put that in my bloodstream, and then my brain would say, gee, she's supposed to weigh 125 pounds, and I noticed today she's a little overweight, so I'm going to send some more of this sugar into the muscles to be burned off. And then on another day, it might say, gee, she's a little underweight, so I'm going to send some over here to the fat to be stored. And my body would be making the decision where this food would go appropriately. And so I would weigh the same thing on January 1st and then again on December 31st. And the average caloric consumption for human beings in the United States in a year is 1 million calories. So it's really very difficult to believe that people who are maintaining weight are magically balancing off the exact amount of exercise they do with all those calories. What's much more likely is that the body is making that balance, and it's doing it very well. Now, I'm going to separate this talk into 2 parts just so that the video can load. So we'll stop here, and please view part 2 for the rest of the story.